went to fix the names. Oh, good morning, beautiful people. I'm Babz Rawls-Ivy. Welcome to the second hour of LoveBabz, LoveTalk. I am delighted this morning to have Emily Bernard back. Good morning, my dear. It's so nice to see you. Unmute yourself. I know.
It is great to see you and to hear you're heralded by the most beautiful music.
I listen. Tabisa is our local just our local superstar. She is amazing. She's from South Africa, and she has made her home here with her family, and so she plays a lot of venues here, and her music is just wonderful. So
It was outstanding.
yes, so I'm glad you like
Yes.
it. I love it. How
Mhm.
are you? Happy
I'm doing
holidays.
well. Happy holidays to you. I'm watching snow fall delicately onto the trees here in Vermont. Is it snowing there yet? Do you
Oh
have any snow?
yes, we
Yeah.
we we've got a little bit something going on here. It's very
Yeah.
pretty, very
Yeah,
pretty.
it's always nice when it starts.
When it starts, and then you're like, okay,
Yeah.
stop.
It's like a baby. They're always cute at the beginning.
And then you're like, okay, this is going
Oh
on too
yeah.
long. All right. So listen, there is a lot to unpack here. Nella Larsen's passing, which is about a little over 100 years old, this book.
That's right. You're right.
And,
We're gonna come up on a 100-year anniversary soon.
and here we are talking about it. It's a film, and it still elicits a great deal of conversation and controversy in community and out of community about passing and
Hmm.
what that means. So, and you have been with this for quite some time. This
I
whole
have.
with Nella Larsen, her story, this book. Talk a little bit about this your journey before we get into
Journey.
like what passing means.
Well, my journey with this book begins, like all of our journeys, with my mother. My mother was a student at Fisk University, and so the Nella Larsen was at Fisk for a while. She came down to Fisk with her husband, Elmer Imes. I think he was a scientist. I want to say physicist, some hard science. She followed him. It was a disaster for her, but the setting was so familiar to me that I think when I read the book first when I was in college, it answered my homesickness because all of particularly Quicksand, the novel that precedes this one. But
Hmm.
Nella, spent so much time at Fisk, and it's really there in the book. And all the questions I think that she's asking are questions we're asking as women today. What does it mean to be a woman and to be free? Can a mother be free? What are the opportunities we have really for defining who we are? What are the boundaries? And that's why I think the book still is so exciting. Also, this is a book written in 1929 with
Hmm.
these really glamorous, unreliable, not always admirable Black woman characters. And, so it was a radical departure. Right before that, Black women writers in specific, are writing books to uplift the race, to represent Black people in our best light, right? It's that whole uplifting as we climb, and the idea of Reconstruction, that they're doing the work of Reconstruction on the page, taking what has been despised and trying to turn it into something admirable, not only for white Americans, but for Black people to consume, right? Good images of themselves. So for Larsen to turn around and say, here's a human being. She is not, someone who's noble, but she is someone really exciting, and she's living out a truly American story, which is a story about individualism. Can we be who we are? Can we make up who we are? And what does money have to do with it? So the book really it enters into all the important debates about womanhood, about race and racial identity. What does it mean to be Black in modern America? And that's what the book is really taking up with women's stories, which I think is still very rare. I think Black writers still labor under that pressure, right?
That's what I think too,
Right.
Emily.
Hmm.
That Black writers are still trying to figure out how much of our messiness can we really put in a book or a movie or a play and still be uplifting to the race, quote unquote.
Yes.
And
Yes.
I think artists and authors still struggle with that. 100 years after this book, we are still struggling with the same issues and women and liberation and freedom. So are you surprised by that? What does that say to you when you look at that in that light?
I'm put in mind of what Amiri Baraka, talks about the blues as the changing same. There are no new stories. We're just recirculating the old ones And I think that's, I would say that one reason I think this is exciting to me now that this movie is getting so much attention, now the book, is because it's important to understand that our ancestors were dealing with the same issues that we are today. We think we have made it all up. We think all the new problems are new uh, to humanity, but they may be new to us in this generation. But there are lessons from our ancestors that we can take, and so that is exciting to me. And of course, it's exciting just personally to watch Nella Larsen get attention for what I think is a really fine novel. I think I mean, this book, The Great Gatsby, they're written around the same era, but to me, passing is so, not that we have to compare, but just thinking about the usual thing that happens where, writing by Black people, by Black women, just get left off into the corners. But this book, I mean, it's got everything. It is truly an American story. And Larson didn't get nearly enough credit in her lifetime for all she accomplished.
Well, I think she's going to get good credit now. So, did you see the film? Have you seen the film?
I did see the movie.
And what did you think? I mean, there was license and liberty taken, yes.
Um, I thought it was really beautiful. I thought that the whole debate that was happening off screen about who was, if they were light skinned and enough. I thought that wasn't really the point. I think there were a lot of people who felt like that's not really the point of the movie. Like, can you tell? The point is that so much about racial identity is it's a story we make up, and you can talk anybody into anything. There's a great story by Anatole Boyard. Liz Boyard wrote a book about about her father, and he was the gatekeeper in New York literary circles. He was a Black man, and no one knew he was Black until his funeral, when all these Black people showed up at the funeral, and the white people were like, "Why are all these Black people?" Anatole was so racist. Well, the reason he was so racist was, of course, because he was trying to make it just overstate. I'm not Black. I'm not Black. I'm not Black. But because Black people, we are, I think, as a people, forgiving. So his Black family comes, and the story begins from there. But the point is, all the Black people knew he was Black. It wasn't a question. He
and
was
that's
always
what
afraid.
I feel about passing, Emily.
Yeah.
And I heard a little bit of the director of this film, and because people were criticizing, well, they don't look like they could pass. But she was like, yes, but to our eyes, to Black people, we know other Black people when we see Black people. It's white people who don't recognize Black people. And that's why she could perform her way into being white, because they didn't see her other than the fairness of her skin and the blonde of her hair. They didn't look at her features. They didn't look at anything. It's like, let's see white skin and like, oh, well, then she must be white.
That's true. And we have a range right in our families. There's not a single Black American, person, maybe of a certain generation. You don't have that whole range in your family. So it is not, remarkable to us to have a very light-skinned blonde person who is Black. But at the same time, as I thought was a great moment in the movie and the book, when Irene says to her husband, "Why do we keep the secret?" But we keep the secret. Elizabeth Alexander has a great poem, I think, called "Family," about a great uncle who had a white wife, a whole white life out in Minnesota, I think, or somewhere in the Northwest, and would come to see his Black family. The wife never found out, and the Black family never outed him. So, and Brian says that at some point in the book, and I think in the movie, why do we keep these secrets? So that's a collusion, and isn't all identity a story? I was thinking about, what is it made of? What identity is made of? It's a story. This is maybe a crazy example, but thinking about my daughters, you and I are both adoptive mothers, and love in my home it's a promise. It's words. It's a behavior. It's not blood. And so,
right.
in the way identity is, identity is about the stories we tell ourselves, the stories we can convince other people to believe. And that's really what happened. Is that it's not about what you can tell here and there. It's about these ideas about race that are completely, illogical and based in myth as opposed to scientific fact.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What I was fascinated by, and I hadn't read the book since undergrad, 40 years ago. So when the film came out, I was just so excited because I just thought it was beautifully done. I love that it was shot in black and white. It gives it a certain kind of elegance And also plays up the black white kind of theme, I think, in a very nice way. Talk a little bit about um uh uh Irene. I mean, what is her name? Irene.
Irene, yeah, yeah.
And her she could have passed, but she didn't pass. I mean, she passed when she felt like it, like when she went to the store and bought the toys or whatever. Talk a little bit about. I felt like she was a very frustrated, pent up, trapped woman. Like she felt trapped in airs and respectability and passion.
Yeah, absolutely. I thought that's I thought the greatest success of the movie, to be honest with you. I've never felt so sympathetic to Irene, and I've read the book, many times. I've taught it a bunch of times, but I thought, wow, Irene was in great pain, and I think as you're talking, it occurs to me because this is of course a moment, the new woman, and that's for white women, right? For mainstream white women, that kind of that as many of those we talk about, these big cultural events, often they apply to, the kind of invisible word is white, to the new white woman. And there's a whole vocabulary made up for this new. She's talked about in advertisements and women's magazines. The new woman, she has a new hairstyle. She dresses differently. So there's a vocabulary for this new upper middle class white woman. But what about the black woman? And I think about how Alice Walker gave us the term womanism, as an answer to feminism. But it was important because it gave us a term. Those of us who felt left outside of, yeah, I hear you, Betty Friedan, but not exactly. Well, you talk about women. Well, my mother always working woman in my family. So Alice Walker gave us a name, and that's so important, right? To have a name your experience. There is no name for Irene, and I think that's what the film really is about. Is that she was suffocating. She was mute. She could not speak her pain. Why? Because there was no language for it. And thinking about the Harlem Renaissance in general, which we celebrate, and it was such a fascinating and important and unique moment in our history, but it was a moment largely for men. The women in the movement suffered. Nella Larsen, Dorla Hurston, we celebrate them today, but they were ignored by their male peers. And often some of the men that we rejoice in, including Langston Hughes, they let this kicker when they were down. He had a great time kikiing with Arna Bontemps when Nella Larsen was brought up on plagiarism charges. She found no support from that community. The women were really left out. That movement was all often about, when we talk about the race, often we defer to, or the default becomes masculinity, just the way that in the larger world, the default is white. And so where were the women? And I think for what we get with Irene is a woman who is very trapped in a lot of bourgeois aspirations, right? But she has her own story, but there's no name for that story. And that's really, I think, the problem in the book. She can't connect. Whereas Claire, who kind of is deciding to live outside of all of these norms, is free to make individual decisions. Like sitting and talking with Julina and Sadie, the Claire's housekeepers. And I thought, Irene's housekeepers, but it's not. Irene needs these structures because it's the only thing she has. Her blackness, I think, is so much based, class based, and it's so much based on right. Yeah, black as long as we're all together, but not Zulina and Sadie and Claire. How dare you, speak to the servants? So let's face it, Irene has a lot of limitations. She's not someone I think who is as progressive as she thinks she is. She's actually quite conservative. Her blackness I think is very limited, and it certainly doesn't have room for I think her sexual desires. Right? She desires Claire, but there's no vocabulary for her. So she's sitting here suffering, and we all have to pay for it, especially Claire. But Irene, I think, is a complicated character and somebody who's very dangerous, like Sula. As Morrison says, Sula, she was an artist who had no art form, and that made her dangerous. I'm paraphrasing those beautiful lines from Sula. But I think that's a problem with Irene. A lot of energy, but
and I got the sense that she would do anything to maintain her own jail, even push a woman out a window.
Yeah, I agree.
I mean, that's how I felt. I felt like she knew this was coming to a head, and that maybe her husband might run off with this woman, or maybe or she might run off with this woman, or
I know what you mean. I couldn't help it. I was thinking about those court cases. I never know if this was a myth or not, but young white boys who were let off by the court for affluenza.
Mm.
You remember that? And I thought,
Hmm.
well, is that what Irene is suffering from? Some affluenza? I mean, because you're right. Anything to protect the status quo in her own life, and that is not only her marriage, but I think her very fragile sense of identity.
Yes. Yes. What I found fascinating is the way that she would move through her day, and she would be like exhausted, right? Like I'm like, girl, what is going on? Like she would just be in the middle of the day having a nap because it was just, and I thought, you know what? It is exhausting trying to hold down some inauthenticity that breaks your spirit. That's
Yeah.
got to be exhausting.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's exactly what she's suffering from in authenticity.
So I was struck by her husband wasn't happy either. Like he was trying to like figure out how to get to South America, right? Like maybe we should. And I didn't understand any of that, but I was like, okay, if you got to go somewhere, that might be a good place. But I think he was trying to go someplace where he could feel like himself and not
I
be
think you're right.
constrained by race and affluence and all of that.
You're right. The striving. Well, and let's not forget. I don't know if it's still true of Brazil, but certainly when the time when Brian's dreaming of this escape, you know, when it comes to racial identity in Brazil, what Brian is imagining is that there'll be a greater range, right? And that has historically been true with Brazil, right? It's not just black white. There's a greater range in terms of how one identifies, and a different kind of social order than. And I think you're right. I think he's hoping that he can be free. He hates his work. He can't stand his patients. He feels so constrained, I think, by the life he has made, and it's a life anybody would admire. Brian is a successful doctor. He's got two uh, obedient, adorable boys, and he's got a wife who I guess is someone people really admire and want to spend time with. Right? On the outside it looks perfect, right? Exactly what you want, but he's so miserable, and she can't bear to have him talk about his misery. I think because it frightens her that he has ideas, and he's not just the Ken to her Barbie, I mean, that's all she can bear. But I think you're right. I think he wants freedom. I think he wants something, a sexier life. You know, um, Obviously, their sexual communion is not working out that well for him. He keeps wanting to
Hmm.
talk about it. The things he wants to talk about are race and sex, and she can't bear even talking about it. She doesn't want even her kids to know about it. So you wonder how is this going to be tenable for them? But I think Claire would rather him, you know, she'd rather get rid of everybody than, and certainly Irene imagines Claire is the obstacle, right, to her, to just Brian shutting up. I don't think she cares if Brian's happy or not. Just please shut up and let me try to get through this bourgeois life. Um, but it reminds me of, you ever read, I love Harriet Jacobs, her book, Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl. And
Mm.
she has she sharpens that beautiful cudgel, her pen, that beautiful razor sharp pen, especially for the white mistresses, and says that must be so exhausting to just lie around and order other people around and have these servants whipped within it. It must be very exhausting for you, as you said that for you know Irene leaning back on her chaise lounge, just really overwhelmed by her femininity. And but I think that it's funny because I don't know that we're meant. How are we meant as viewers? Are we supposed to be sympathetic to who did you sympathize with in the movie?
Oh my God. I think I sympathize with them both on some level.
Yeah,
That Claire was dangerously flirting with this story, with her story of race and acceptance and look what I can do and behaving into that. And I felt sympathetic toward Claire because I could clearly see she was trapped and felt like she had no way to move up, down, left, or right, except, and I think, there, I thought, here's this doctor with this very light skinned wife. And I thought colorism because, that she's part of the trappings of success. She's got to be part of the trappings of success. And that's a caged bird, right? I thought about that. So I thought I found them both to be tragic and I was sympathetic toward both.
Yes.
I felt some kind of way for both of them, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. I understand. Yeah, I did too. I felt how trapped. I felt, as you say, I felt how trapped they were. Even though you're living in New York in the late 20s, you don't know what's coming, right? The crash is around the corner and the depression, but at this moment in time, everything looks possible. And especially if you are, living in Harlem and have some money, you have a whole world. You have Black doctors, you can really create your own space. Um, but for these women and for Brian too, you're right. I mean, he's trapped as well. And even you wonder, um, what does it cost him? What has it cost him to have everything? You
Mm.
know, can he even see? I mean, if colorism was so alive, of course, it's still alive now, so alive in the 20s. You look at just the advertisements, right? And for lightening creams and hair straightening creams, and we know all the dangers of those early products. So, what does it cost? But if you can't see beyond that paradigm, okay, look, I'm proud of who I am. I'm Black. We're making something new. We're starting, a whole climb for ourselves and the community. But what are we basing it on? How can we move away from this? And I had a sense of the limitations here, as I hadn't before. Watching these characters literally move throughout their days and thinking, out of these square blocks, it gets a little tricky.
Yes. Yes. And what fascinates me now, and thinking about passing, I mean, this book is 100 years old, but we're still seeing stories now of people sort of passing, or I don't think we call it passing, right? We call it, I don't know what we call it, but people passing, like sort of blurring the lines between their ethnicities and their origins. I mean, we see it with actors, we see it with all kinds of people. Are we prepared, Emily, to have this conversation in this moment about what that looks like, and what that means, and is it harmful to us globally?
I love the question. Are we prepared to have it now? I want to know what you think. I think not. I think what I'm seeing now from my little corner of the world is not a lot of attention to complexity. In our discussions about race these days, I don't think we are what we're exhibiting is a lot of fear. You know, so there are all the things you're not supposed to say, and there's a lot of confusion. Um, if we can't talk with nuance about who we are and what our lives are like, and if we can't, those things can't be heard. I don't know where we are. I don't know where we are, that we're in a culture where teachers are being fired for teaching the truth about the founding of this country. You've seen
Mhm.
those memes, and it's just so exact. Yes, how can you presume to tell the story of this country, and not talk about the foundational moments, which are full of violence, aggression. You know, white supremacy is a foundational language, right? There's no way around it. There's no way to, and why would you want to? I don't understand people who don't want to know the truth and examine the truth. What are you afraid of? What are you afraid of? And that worries me, that we seem to be a country that's just getting mired in fear, and I see that happening on all parts of the spectrum. I don't think we're able to have honest conversations right now around race and racial identity. I think there's a lot of boundaries being drawn. There's a lot of history that's being ignored. I guess that's back to that question. For me, I'm excited that the book is out here. I hope that it will enable readers and viewers to see these issues we've been dealing with for a long time, basically since we started talking about racial identity. What will it take? I think it's good. I don't know what it will take to get us to a place where we can have nuanced conversations. I mean, our identities were never simple. That's what we all know in our lives. They were never
Mhm.
simple. We talk about our families, my family, the range of skin colors. One of my mother's younger sisters has very light skin, and it messed with her head, when she was growing up. And she had a really different idea of her relationship to the world when she was a young person because of her skin color. As she got older, that changed. She was in the military. My point is that all of our identities are varied. They're changing. That's the only constant, my mother used to say, in life is change. So there's no way to create boundaries and say this person is Black, this person is. I heard Danzy Senna say, I thought it was so profound on a panel. She said she was born a Black woman and became a mixed race woman. And, what she meant was there was never any question. She was a child that she was Black, even though she has very fair skin. But it's only with, kind of new language now, a new cultural, a new cultural shape, that we have another vocabulary, more vocabulary to talk about race. You see what I'm saying, though? But the identity never changed. There've always been people who, in our families, in our lives, who are on the edges, and that's real life. And if we start cordoning off and saying, well, this person really isn't Black, and this person really isn't Black, I don't see the point of that. I don't think that's.
I think I feel you on that, because there's a lot of what you're not Black, or what is Black. How are we defining Black? I think we had a sense of I think we were for a long time defining Black as skin color, and then experiences, and then maybe some culture. But Black Caribbean is very different from Black African, and depending on what part of Africa I'm speaking about, it's very different, right? From island to island, Black means something is very different in its expression. So how do we? And I think this is unique to Black people all over the world, that we don't have a one way to be Black, but yet we are always striving to have one way to be Black.
I agree. I really think the problem, unlike so many other groups, I'm thinking even in my father's family, there was always a homeland, it's Trinidad, and of course before that, but there's always a place outside of this country that called him, that named him, and for Black Americans who really see ourselves, our beginnings on this soil, that trying to carve out a separate sphere, our own sphere, right, is a real challenge, and it's about a longing for all of that, what was lost in the Middle Passage, honestly. So much was lost, right? So we're always trying to, our acts of recovery are also acts of invention. So when we are, trying to identify what racial identity is, what Blackness is, we're actually inventing it at the same time, right? We are establishing rules, and they change generation to generation. It's a problem because for there to be winners, there are going to be losers. For there to be insiders, outsiders, and we've done a real disservice to people even like James Baldwin. There's a whole history. James Baldwin's later years were plagued by activists far, far left. I'm talking about Baraka, talking about Ishmael Reed, who went after Baldwin and said, "You are not Black. You are a disservice. You're doing disservice to the race. All you want is to, it was very laden with homophobia, you can imagine, and it really crushed him. Same was true for Hurston. I was just looking at some articles recently. Roy Oddly called her a handkerchief head, in the pages of the Chicago Defender. I'm telling you, these people were out of blood. Why are these knockdown, drag out battles? Because there is so much at stake that we perceive, right? As we were saying, representation. What is the job of the Black artist? We perceive there's so much at stake. We take it so personally. Freddie Washington had to defend herself for years about playing Pecola Breedlove in invitation. People thought she meant it, and she would have to say, "No, I love myself. I'm a Black woman. I love being Black."
I was just playing a character.
Because people felt this is dangerous. This is dangerous. We cannot. But I think we have to ask ourselves, what is it? What is the danger? I think it's always important to think with nuance about these things, right? There's no such thing. There are no absolutes when I think it comes to the identity game. And there are no winners if you're always trying to create losers. Because in the end, here we are with Mr. Baldwin again, and the great Madame Hurston, right? We revere them, we love them. But what about all those years when they were told that they were bringing the race down?
Yeah.
It happens. It's just too. That's what I see as a real constant, is that the pendulum just keeps swinging back and forth, and unless you toe the line, then you're going to get that big kind of slap. But it always changes anyway, right? According to politics, so there's no way to be absolutely pure in any of these kinds of calculations, right? Because our lives are complex and they intersect with so many other different ways of being, right? We are Black women, and we are also, you and I have a great attachment to New Haven, and so many other things that define us. So why do we limit ourselves at each other? To to what end? But I think it's just an ongoing, it's an anxiety that can never be answered,
Mm.
because the anxiety, there's so much loss. There's already been so much loss. There's no way to correct the great error. You know, there's no way to correct it. We have to think about. I think we have to be a, a, a lot more accepting of that fact, and that rooting out who we think of the internal enemies is not going to liberate us. It hasn't worked out before. It won't work out now. I was reading a tweet and someone was saying about, those people who are politically Black as opposed to people racially Black. I'm thinking, here we go again. This is back to Hurston saying skin folks versus skin folks. And I get it, right? Candace Owens, she's not my sister,
Oh,
right? There
oh.
are some, dare I speak her name on our program.
But yet she belongs to us.
I think about her mother. I tell you, whenever I look at her, I think her poor mother. She has a mother, and right. I think deciding here that it sounds the enemies of the state. Let's ferret them out and round them up. Dangerous thinking. And I think it doesn't. I don't think it moves us forward. I think it just keeps us running in circles.
Yeah. So as we wrap up this wonderful conversation, I'm so grateful for it because I've been looking forward to it since you said yes. How should we moving forward think about passing? Think about Nella Larsen. Think about this film. Think about us as people on a spectrum. How do we process this 100 years later? We're still grappling with who's Black and what does that mean?
Yeah. Well, here's what I think. I want everyone to know that Nella Larsen wrote these amazing books, two of the finest novels, I think, that really talk about this moment, the Jazz Age, the Harlem Renaissance, Black art in this period. She is, I'm so happy her name is out there and people are talking about her work now because she, really lived out her life. She had kind of disappeared. She was working as a nurse, in Harlem, but the scandal, she wrote a story and she was accused of plagiarism and it really rocked her. And again, what also rocked her was the lack of support she got, the kind of cold wind she got from her Harlem Renaissance peers instead of support. It was it was shattering to her, and a marriage that ended, and she was really humiliated. It was a hard end. So I want people to know that. I think sometimes we celebrate these artists and their art, and don't recognize what it cost them. Especially a Black woman of that time period. I want people to know how hard she worked and what a serious artist she was, and how little credit she received. That's an important part of the story for me. Thinking about what happened how we think about passing and moving forward. We have so much to learn from the ancestors. James Baldwin said, you think your pain is unusual, you think your pain is unique, and then you read. So many of the questions we're dealing with today, our forebears were also contending with them and wrote about them. I hope that if nothing else, that there are readers out there, viewers of the film will say, oh, maybe Nella Larsen has something to tell me. Maybe this book has something to tell me. I'm not alone. The crisis I'm dealing with, this person was almost 100 years ago, as you say. And so we all are. So there are no simple answers to these questions. I think what we need to give this generation now, I think, is a sense of how we contended with these issues. It's up to them now to make up their own story, but we have a trove of information and of experiences to share with them. And this is one of them. And what she's telling, as she's saying, the story is so complex. It's a story about two women. It's about desire, about intimacy, about race and politics, about, sexuality, class, as all that. So in these slim pages, she tackled it all, and so I don't, whenever I read back over these older writers, I just take my hat off, even if I'm not wearing a hat. It's just, look what they did and all the backdrop of their lives. And they still sat down and produced some work. They still sat down and dealt honestly and seriously with the lives they were living. And that's the least we all can do, is to really do that, to contribute to our own age, our honest witnessing, what we're experiencing, our gains and losses, triumphs, failures, all of it. That's a whole human story. And that's what I think she's telling here. A story about two Black women, neither of which, is, the kind of Sojourner Truth or Harriet Tubman. These were complex women who were not as strong as they thought they were, who were self-centered, materialistic, dishonest, but they lived. And they had stories to tell. And they were Americans caught up in a moment, and they're creatures of their moment. And that question, I think, do we create ourselves or ourselves produce for us? Because if nothing else, Irene and Claire are products of consumer culture. So passing, if anything, I think is a comment on what does it mean when you live in a society where everything is disposable? And even now with our cancel culture, when people are disposable, to me, that is an error that's capitalist thinking.
Mm-hmm.
You can just X people out and throw them away. We're always looking for a better, younger, newer model in this country, And so I think this book is a real warning to those of us who think that we're pledging allegiance to this country. We really pledge allegiance to the almighty dollar, and that's always going to win. And that's what I think Irene and Claire are both to some certain degree caught up in, and why their stories are not tenable, because that's not what it means to live a human life, is to be caught up in those kind of very outmoded and very simplistic ideas about success. They were chasing success, and look where it got them. Claire lands on the ground. Irene, who knows what's going to happen to her? She's going to kill the next person who comes along and tries to threaten her life.
Right.
Are you protecting?
Right.
Is that your life? Is that what you're protecting? All that stuff that you love. What does it mean? And that's, I think, what the book is really asking.
Oh my gosh, Emily, I could just talk to you all day. You must come back and talk more about this, because we got to unpack. We got to unpack some of these trashy shows that.
Oh yeah.
Because I know you are a fan of some of these shows.
Yeah. Let's please. Nobody talked about it.
Because I remember the last time we talked, you're like, I love to see these messy Black women. So I would be more than honored to have those kinds of conversations with you, because I am fascinated by what we're seeing. And it took you saying that you were here for it that made me rethink my position, because I was in another place about it. And it took you saying that to really make me think, let me shift my thinking and be like, you know what? We are messy, and we can see messy, and it's no assassination on the race when we see us like that. So I have to have you come back. Thank you so much, Emily.
Thank you. I'll see you again. Thank you. It was great to talk with you.
Oh, certainly good.
Thanks for having me.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas to you.
Right. Thank you, Harry. I'm out.
Thank you, Harry. Bye-bye. Thank you. Bye, Babz.
Oh, that was such a good conversation.
That was fun. Can you tell me who the singer was again?
Tabisa. Thabisa.
Thabisa.
Thab. I'll send you some links.
Okay.
I'll send you some links of her music.
All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. I'll see you soon.
Yes.
Bye.
All right, everybody. I'll see you tomorrow. Bye, Harry. Thank you. Hi, this is Babz Rawls-Ivy from New Haven, Connecticut, and you're listening to WNHHLP 103.5 FM, streaming live at newhavenindependent.org.